Before we dive into this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really helps support this kind of storytelling. Also, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to see how far these stories are reaching. I took the job because I needed the cash. Night shift at a remote forest surveillance station, just me, a dozen monitors, and a bunch of cameras scattered in the woods. The gig was supposed to be easy. Watch for poachers, log any movement, call the ranger if something big pops up. Boring, but I'd take it. The first week was a snooze. The screen showed nothing but trees swaying in the wind, maybe a deer here or there. The only sound was the hum of the monitors and the occasional creak of the old trailer we were stuck in. But then, little things. Like how camera 7 would glitch for a second, like someone was messing with the feed. Or how I'd glance at the clock and realize 5 minutes had vanished. I blamed fatigue. Then the loops started. I'd catch the same squirrel darting across the same patch of ground on camera 3. Then again, 3 minutes later. Same angle, same speed. I checked the timestamps. They were real. I called the tech guy, but he said the system was solid. The real weirdness hit around midnight on a Tuesday. I was zoning out when camera 12 flickered. When it came back, there was a figure in the frame, a man in a tattered coat standing right at the edge of the tree line. But the thing, he waved, at the camera, at me. I froze. Then the screen went static. By the time it cleared, the guy was gone. I laughed it off, until I checked the other cameras. Camera 5 showed the same figure, standing in a clearing a mile away. Camera 9 had him near an abandoned cabin, all at the same time. I zoomed in. His face was featureless, like someone had painted it with wet clay. The hum of the monitors got louder, like they were vibrating. That's when the cabin's feed went live. The door was locked, the windows boarded up. But there he was, inside, pacing. And then, he turned and looked straight at the camera. His mouth moved. I swear he whispered my name. I called the ranger. No answer. Tried to shut down the system. The power buttons didn't work. The figure started walking toward the cabin's camera lens, step by step, until his face filled the screen. Up close, his eyes were all black, no whites, no pupils. The monitors went dark. Then, one by one, they lit up again. The figure was gone, but the timestamp had jumped forward an hour. I lasted 2 more shifts. Every night the footage got worse. The cabin's camera showed him inside the trailer with me, watching over my shoulder. I'd spin around, but there was nothing. Just the smell of wet earth and something metallic like blood. I quit. Should have known it wouldn't end there. Every morning my email pings. New footage. Always from the night before. Always of me sitting at the desk, watching me. They say the forest never sleeps. I don't open the attachments anymore, but I still hear the hum sometimes. In the dark, behind me. The day seems like it was yesterday to me. After he died, my uncle left me his old country workshop. As a child, I always enjoyed going there to assist him with his woodcarving projects. Because he could carve anything out of a block of wood, he was somewhat of a legend in that area. Tools hung on the walls like a collection of medieval weapons, and the workshop was crammed with partially completed projects. I made the decision to clean it out over the course of a weekend, and possibly sell some of his belongings. I discovered her at that point. Like a ghost at a seance, she sat in the corner, draped in a white sheet. I assumed it was just another statue, perhaps a model for one of his well-known dolls. My uncle sold lifelike figures he carved for collectors for thousands of dollars. However, there was a problem when I pulled the sheet back. The skin texture appeared realistic and the proportions were ideal, but something was off. Despite having glass eyes, she seemed to follow me around the room. I brushed it off as a figment of my imagination. Sawdust, turpentine, and an unidentified sweet smell filled the workshop. The birds were singing their evening melodies outside, but there was a heavy silence within. For the junk collectors, I made the decision to move her outside. She felt hollow and abnormally light for her size as I lifted her. Her limbs were too rigid and flawless to move naturally. Even after I put her down in the back of my truck, I continued to stare at her in the rearview mirror. Even from the back, she seemed to be observing me. I had trouble sleeping that night. Those glass eyes stared at me every time I closed my eyes. My intuition told me otherwise, but I kept telling myself it was just a doll, a very realistic doll. I heard a slight scratching noise coming from the garage in the middle of the night. Taking a flashlight, I set out to look into it. The doll had vanished. She was not in the back of the truck. The rational side of my brain told me that I must have dreamed of loading her into the truck, but I knew I hadn't. And my heart began to race. She was back in the workshop the following morning, sitting in the same location where I had first seen her. As if I had never touched her, the sheet was back over her head. Although I was frightened, I attributed it to stress and sadness. I made the decision to just pack up the remainder of the workshop and leave her alone. However, I had the constant feeling that someone was observing me while I worked. The room's temperature appeared to drop, and the previously pleasant scent returned, though stronger than usual. I was tense by the afternoon. Like someone calling my name, I kept hearing whispers that were too faint to identify. I kept dropping tools and jumping at shadows because I couldn't concentrate. I made the decision to quit and head home. I saw something on the workbench just as I was ready to go. A new carving of my face. Even the scar above my eyebrow was horrifyingly accurate. I don't recall displaying that scar to my uncle. He never saw it, as far as I can recall. I heard footsteps behind me just as I was ready to run. She was there when I slowly turned around, the doll, but in a different way. She no longer had glass eyes. Their eyes, wide with terror, were real, human eyes. Her movements had changed, becoming jerky but purposeful. She appeared to be breathing as I watched her chest rise and fall. I was unable to move or speak. Her joints creaked like an old house settling as she took one step toward me and then another. "Why are you here?" When I did ask, it was hardly more than a whisper. She continued to approach without responding. I saw that, like mine, she now had small scars between her fingers. There was a scar that matched the face carving on the workbench. I began to back off, stumbling over tools and hitting the floor. She touched my face instead of hurting me. Her fingers were human, soft and cold. "Who are you?" With tears dripping up in my eyes, I repeated the question. Her lips moved for the first time. "I'm what you left behind," she said, mimicking my voice exactly. How I left that workshop is a mystery to me. I recall driving and running until I arrived in the city. I never returned, and I never mentioned it to anyone. But occasionally I see her face staring back at me when I catch my reflection in a window. There's something different about the scar above my eyebrow, more noticeable. I occasionally hear that faint scratching sound coming from the garage when I'm by myself in a quiet room. I am aware that she is still there, awaiting my return. And part of me wonders if I ever really left at all. The gravel crunched under my tires as I turned off the main road, leaving the last sign of civilization behind. Willow Creek wasn't on most maps, just a dot really, nestled deep in a valley surrounded by ancient overgrown hills. I'd picked it from a dusty old brochure, needing a quiet place, a slow place, after the city had finally worn me down. The cottage I'd rented was small, tucked away at the edge of the village, overlooking a field that sloped down to a sluggish, dark river. On that first afternoon, the air was surprisingly still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something vaguely like wood smoke, but sweeter. It felt for a moment exactly like the peace I'd been craving. The peace didn't last. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the pleasant, natural quiet of the countryside, but an absence of sound that felt deliberate. There were no barking dogs, no children's shouts, no distant hum of machinery, just the wind in the trees. And if I listened hard enough, the soft rhythmic creak of the old wooden sign above the general store. When I went to buy milk, the few people I encountered in the narrow lane looked up, their eyes following me without apparent curiosity, just a calm, unblinking observation. They didn't smile, not really. Their faces were smooth, almost ageless, and their greetings were brief, like pebbles dropped into a deep well. "Afternoon," they'd say, and then the silence would descend again. Days turned into a week, and the stillness persisted. I tried to strike up conversations, leaning against the counter at the general store, asking about the local history or the best walking trails. Mrs. Gable, the proprietor, a woman with tight gray braids and hands like knotted roots, would answer politely, but her words felt clipped, almost rehearsed. Her gaze, when it met mine, held a strange depth, like she was seeing something beyond me. Other villagers would nod, offer a short comment, and then turn back to their tasks, often just standing motionless, staring out at the fields or the river. I started noticing small things. No one seemed to drive cars much, preferring to walk or use bicycles so old they looked like museum pieces. The houses, though well maintained, all had their curtains drawn, even in the brightest part of the day. One evening, I heard a faint droning sound coming from the direction of the old church. It wasn't singing, not exactly. More like a low, sustained hum, punctuated by what sounded like faint rhythmic tapping. I walked closer, curious, but as I rounded the bend, the sound abruptly ceased. The church doors were tightly shut, and the stained glass windows, even in the dim twilight, seemed to absorb all light rather than reflect it. A group of villagers were standing by the churchyard gates, facing away from me, their backs perfectly straight. As I approached, they slowly turned. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes, in the fading light, seemed to hold a dull, almost glassy sheen. They didn't speak, just watched me until I, feeling a sudden chill, offered a strained good night and walked back to my cottage. I began to feel an invisible pressure, a growing awareness of being observed. I'd look out my window and see a figure standing motionless far down the lane, or catch a glimpse of someone disappearing behind a hedge just as I turned my head. It was never overt, never threatening, just a constant, soft presence. My rational mind tried to explain it away. I was new. They were curious. Isolated communities were often reserved, but the feeling festered. My sleep grew restless. I'd wake in the dead of night, convinced I heard faint whispers just outside my window, or the soft scuff of shoes on the gravel path. Each time, I'd pull back the curtain to see only the familiar darkness, the moon casting long, distorted shadows of the trees. Yet the whispers, real or imagined, would linger in my ears, just beyond comprehension. The strangest incident involved my small pocket watch. It was an old family heirloom, always kept wound, always accurate. One morning, I found it on my bedside table, its hand spinning wildly, then freezing at an impossible time. I tried to reset it, but it wouldn't respond. I tucked it away, deciding to take it to a jeweler when I returned to the city. A few days later, I found it again, placed precisely in the center of my kitchen table, its hands now still, set to 03. I hadn't touched it since putting it in my drawer. My breath hitched. I walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just a fraction. Across the field, by the riverbank, a lone figure stood motionless, facing my cottage. It was too far to make out details, but the stance, the stillness, felt unnervingly familiar. The realization settled over me with a cold, heavy weight. I hadn't seen anyone leave the village. No cars heading out, no buses. No deliveries other than the occasional government van, which always left swiftly. And more unsettling still, I hadn't seen anyone new arrive either. Yet the villagers always seemed to be exactly the right number, filling the roles, moving about with their quiet, purpose-driven steps. The unnerving quiet, the unblinking gazes, the old-fashioned clothes, the unvarying routines. It wasn't that they were just reserved or traditional. It was that they were fixed. They were a stage play, performed meticulously, endlessly. One evening, as dusk bled across the sky, painting the river in shades of deep indigo, I watched from my window as Mrs. Gable, the store owner, walked down the lane towards the church. Her steps were slow, deliberate. She passed the cottage of the old blacksmith, a man I'd seen working tirelessly at his forge every day since I arrived. As she passed, he emerged from his doorway, not looking at her, but simply turning to face the same direction, his face blank. Then, the woman who worked in the small library, and the two men from the post office, and the taciturn baker. One by one, they all emerged from their homes and lined up, perfectly spaced, facing the church. No words were exchanged, no greetings, just a silent, orderly procession. As the last sliver of sun vanished, a low, sustained hum began again from the church, that same rhythmic tapping. And then, from the darkest part of the river, where the water swirled into an unseen eddy, a single, clear, high note echoed through the valley. Not quite a voice, not quite a bell, and I knew with a sudden, dreadful certainty that I wasn't just observing them. I was part of their scenery now. The front door of my cottage, which I had locked moments before, stood ajar, letting in the sweet, damp, unmoving air of Willow Creek. I moved to Hollow's End because I needed quiet. Not the kind you find in a city park, but the kind that settles into your bones deep and still. The village was tucked between two hills, just off a road so narrow it felt like the earth had swallowed it whole. No signs, no businesses. Just a few houses huddled together like children afraid of the dark. The realtor said it was peaceful, isolated but not cut off. That last part made me smile. Cut off from what? From everything. The first thing that struck me was how quiet it was. Not the absence of noise. There were birds, wind through the trees, but the silence between things. Like the world held its breath when I walked by. I'd pass someone on the path, and they'd pause. Just for a second, eyes flicking toward me before turning away. No greeting, no nod, just watching. Then moving on as if I weren't there at all. My house was old, built of gray stone and sagging timbers. It stood at the edge of the village, half hidden behind a thicket of birch trees. The door creaked open with a sound like a sigh. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of damp wool and something else. Something like dried herbs or burnt sugar. I didn't notice it at first, but after a few days I started catching it again, every time I came in from outside. The villagers didn't seem to mind my presence. Or maybe they did. They just didn't react. When I waved hello at the bakery, just a little shop with a crooked sign, her eyes stayed on mine too long. Then she turned back to the oven, as if I'd already left. I tried to talk to people, asked about the land, the seasons, the history. Most gave short answers. It's always been this way, one man said, standing by his fence, staring past me into the woods. Another said, "You'll get used to it," but nobody smiled. Nobody laughed. Even the children didn't play. They sat on stoops or in doorways, motionless, watching me with wide, unblinking eyes. Then there were the lights. At night, sometimes I'd see them, flickering in the distance, low to the ground, moving slowly through the trees. Not cars, too small, too steady. I'd go to the window, heart thudding, and watch. But when I stepped outside, nothing. Just darkness, thick and silent. And then the next night, they'd be back. Same pattern, same place. I started keeping a journal. Not because I thought I'd write poetry, but because I wanted to remember. To prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I wrote down the times I saw the lights. The way the baker looked at me. The silence when I asked directions. The way the wind seemed to stop whenever I passed the old well at the center of town. One afternoon, I found an old book in the attic. A ledger, bound in cracked leather. Names, dates, payments. Mostly in pencil, some in ink that had faded to brown. But one entry stood out. October 12, 1947. Payment received, full compliance. No further visits required. Below it, a name. Eleanor Voss, my mother's maiden name. I froze. My hands shook. I flipped through the pages. More names. All familiar. Some with dates stretching back over 100 years. And then I saw it. A list of residents who'd lived in Hollow's End since 1890. My name wasn't there, but my mother's was. Born here. Died here. Buried in the hillside cemetery, according to the records. But I didn't know any of that. I'd grown up in the city. My mother never spoke of this place. Never even mentioned the name Hollow's End. That night I dreamed of the lights again. This time I was walking toward them. Not running, just walking. And the closer I got, the more I realized they weren't moving. They were waiting, standing in a circle around something in the clearing. Something small, human-shaped, wrapped in cloth. And then I heard singing, soft, low, in a language I didn't know, but somehow understood. It was a lullaby, one I'd heard as a child. When I woke, my mouth tasted like iron. I went to the cemetery the next day, found my mother's grave. It was weathered, almost invisible under moss. I knelt beside it, trembling. Then I noticed something odd. The marker wasn't carved with her full name, only Eleanor. No middle initial, no date of birth, just Eleanor. And beneath it, a single word, complied. I stood up, dazed. The sun was high, but the air felt colder. I turned to leave and stopped. A figure stood at the edge of the trees. Tall, thin, wearing a coat that looked too heavy for the season. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me. I called out, "Hello." No answer. I took a step forward. The figure tilted its head slightly, like a bird sensing danger. Then it turned and walked into the woods, disappearing without a sound. I ran back to the house, locked the doors, checked the windows. Nothing seemed wrong, but the silence inside was different now, thicker, like the walls were listening. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the trees, waiting, hoping the lights wouldn't come. But they did, same as before, moving slowly through the forest. Closer this time. So close I could see their glow, soft yellow, like candlelight trapped in glass. And then I saw them, shapes, figures, standing in the circle, silent, still, watching the clearing. One of them turned, slowly, deliberately. It was me, or someone who looked exactly like me. Same face, same clothes, same hesitation in the way they lifted their hand. I screamed, but no sound came out. I stood up, rushed to the door, threw it open, only to find the path leading to the woods now blocked by a wall of trees, roots twisted together like fingers. The village was gone. The house was still there, but the world beyond it had changed. Everything was darker, smaller, as if the village had folded in on itself. I backed away, sat on the floor, breathed, tried to think. Then I remembered the journal. I opened it, turned to the last page. I hadn't written anything in weeks, but the handwriting was mine, and the words read, "They're waiting for the new one." I'm not sure who I am anymore, but I know I have to stay, for the others, for the balance. Below it, a date, today, and beneath that, a note in a different hand, fainter, older, shaky. "Welcome home, Eleanor.